For various complicated reasons, an ultimatum was issued to the Zulus. The Zulus were perceived by the British colonial government in Natal to constitute a military threat to Lord Carnarvon's plan for the confederation of this country. The thrust of the ultimatum, which was issued on the 11th of December 1878, was that the Zulus would have to disband their army, and if they failed to comply with this within the prescribed period, it was the British intention to come and disband it for them. For various good reasons, the Zulus did not see fit to comply with the terms of this ultimatum, so Lord Chelmsford, in command of Her Majesty's forces in South Africa, decided that he would invade Zululand with 3 huge columns. The strongest of these 3 columns, the big central column, was to move from Pietermaritzburg to Greytown, across the Tugela River at the Tugela Ferry, and up onto the big plateau, the Biggersberg, which is a spur of the Drakensberg Mountains. And 12 miles southwest of Rorke's Drift, this column stopped and fortified a position called Helpmekaar. Lord Chelmsford and his staff decided to accompany the central column, so effectively he supersedes the column commander, Colonel Richard Thomas Glynn. Chelmsford is calling the shots. Lord Chelmsford stops the central column at Helpmekaar. When it became clear to Chelmsford that everything was proceeding according to plan, Lord Chelmsford descended down the Norstripper Pass to Rorke's Drift on the Buffalo River. It was New Year's Day, 1879, and there he waited for the ultimatum to expire, and that huge chaos of men, wagons and livestock that we described for you at Isandlwana, one must imagine at the mission station of Rorke's Drift. 4,800 men, 220 wagons, 4,500 oxen, and our friend Lieutenant Charles Harford of the 99th Regiment, who I have always used as a thread in my stories, mutters, "Rorke's Drift, what a pit," he said. It was impossible to take in a mouthful of food without imbibing at least a half a dozen flies, and one can imagine Welshmen writing home to their mothers in Monmouth that only a bloody Irishman could leave his name to a place like this, Rorke's Drift. Rorke's Drift had had quite a history even up until this point. If one looks from the mission at the Oscarberg mountain, one can only see the rump of the hill. It is in fact a large mountain that rises up beyond the rump and drops off into the Buffalo River. The Zulus call the mountain Shiane, which means eyebrow. The mountain looks like an eyebrow. It was later renamed Oscarberg in honor of King Oscar of Sweden by the missionary Otto Witt. The mountain is terraced by a series of sandstone shelves puckered with caves. These caves are filled with Stone Age artifacts and rock art, indicating that this site was well occupied during the Middle Stone Age period. Archaeologists intimate that this site may have been continuously occupied by human beings for tens of thousands of years, and this human occupation may have something to do with a geological feature on the Buffalo River, 1,000 yards away. The Buffalo River, up until this point, is a big, slow, meandering stream. But here at Rorke's Drift it starts to cut its way into the low country, and its first move in doing so is to slide over a series of sandstone shelves which constitute the most magnificent series of natural causeways. A drift is a natural fording point on a river. There is a particularly good drift here at Rorke's Drift, a feature not repeated along the course of this river for more than 60 miles, and it was this ford that attracted those Stone Age people, and it was this ford that attracted Lord Chelmsford and his men. Rorke's Drift was named Rorke's Drift after an Irish trader come farmer called James Rorke, Esquire. Rorke was an energetic, intrepid, entrepreneurial Irishman. Rorke had come to this country in 1849. He came to South Africa because of a lack of potatoes in Ireland. Rorke had a huge farm, which consisted of the Shiane mountain and a great plain that extends north and west from the base of the mountain. Rorke built his little establishment up on a shelf of sandstone at the foot of the Shiane mountain. The shelf used to drop off about 4 foot sheer. The missionaries have broken and filled the steep bank over the intervening years. He built a house where the museum stands today, and 40 yards off to the north he built a storeroom where the little church stands today. The church is, in itself, an historic building. It was completed in 1882 and almost dates from this period. The church was built using some of the stone from Rorke's original storeroom and sits on the same spot as that original building. It is roughly the same size as Rorke's storeroom, and all one must do is imagine the church standing today, having a thatched roof and a veranda down its long side. In this storeroom, Rorke housed the commodities that he used to trade with his friends, the Zulus, and they loved him, and they called him Jimu, and they called his establishment Kwajimu, or Jim's Place. The old Zulu folk still call Rorke's Drift Kwajimu to this day. Rorke used to keep his milk cows in the well-built stone cattle kraal, which is still in its original position at the northern end of the ledge. James Rorke's great friend was the chieftain Schayo Gaqongongobese, was the wealthy and powerful chieftain who lived in the Bache River Valley opposite Rorke's Drift. Rorke and Schayo spent much time together. There are stories of these men walking the plains north of Rorke's Drift, clad in their jackets and cloth caps and shooting wildfowl together. These were balmy, happy days, and it is a great shame that it had to change. Schayo was the chieftain who in due course was to give Bartle Frere one of the pretexts for the issuing of the British ultimatum. Rorke was married to the most beautiful woman, Sarah. The local hunters of the period tell us that such a beauty was she, that after a protracted hunting trip to Mozambique and back, it was absolutely obligatory to pop in at Rorke's Drift just to gaze into the eyes of Sarah. This had the effect, they said, of raising one's flagging spirit. There is a photograph of Sarah in the museum at Rorke's Drift. I have stared at that photograph long and hard, and beauty I cannot find, and I've come to the inescapable conclusion that Sarah's reputation as a great beauty must have something to do with the scarcity value she must have enjoyed in these parts at this time. Rorke used to spend a fair amount of time sitting on his veranda, looking at his view, which was not a bad one, and apparently he sat there taking in vast quantities of square-face gin, to which eventually he becomes addicted. In 1875, James Rorke sent his women servants off to Ladysmith to replenish the supply of square-face, and they failed to return with this precious commodity, and in a fit of alcoholic rage, James Rorke shot himself. He now lies buried about 300 yards from the mission building at the foot of the Oscarberg mountain. He is buried under a yard of concrete. He did not want anyone to interfere with his remains. Excerpt, James Rorke. On Rorke's death, this property passes into the hands of the Swedish Missionary Society, and they sent out a rather controversial character to start up a mission station which, because of its juxtaposition with that excellent ford, was to service both banks of the Buffalo. His name was Witt, Otto Witt. It is not clear if Witt demolished Rorke's old house before rebuilding, or if he simply added on to the existing dwelling. But he built a substantial dwelling on the same spot, and it was this house of Witt's which was, as it happened, destroyed by fire during the course of the Battle of Rorke's Drift. But Witt returned in 1879 and rebuilt his house pretty much on the same foundations and according to the same design, and the building which is today the museum is the house that Witt built, and it's in its 1879-1880 condition. It has been beautifully restored and is today the most delightful little museum and well worth a visit. The differences between the building that you see today and the building as it was on the day of the battle are these. The building today has a corrugated iron roof, whereas the original building had a thatched roof, and this building, down two sides, consisted of a series of little cubbyhole rooms which communicated largely with the exterior. This is a peculiar piece of South African colonial architecture. It was because the loo was detached or semi-detached, and this was to have great moment in the battle. The existing veranda is probably original. It led on to two big ante-rooms, one of which communicated with a little cubbyhole room. And Witt lived in this house with his wife and 3 infant children. He did not have the gorgeous daughter that the movie Zulu gave him. Otto Witt was not particularly pleased to see Lord Chelmsford and his men. And Chelmsford, having descended from the healthy heights of Helpmachar down to these lower altitudes, notes immediately that his men started to succumb to those maladies that took more lives of British soldiers in this country than ever did the spears of the Zulus or the bullets of the Boers: dysentery and enteric fever. If ever you want the harsh reality of what fever did to British soldiery in this country driven home to you, you should wander through the cemetery at Intombe in Ladysmith, the cemetery that serviced the British garrison during the siege. Go and wander through those hundreds of crosses marking the graves of men who died of fever.